All right, we're live. Here's Dive into World Building at the new time. Dun, dun, dun. And it's afternoon, and everybody seems to have followed me. So success on part one of the changeover. Today I figured we would just talk about birds again, because last time we kind of talked about pet birds and interacting with birds as pets, which I think is, useful for fiction. But we didn't ever get into, details of bird evolution, and we didn't talk about different types of birds in the world. We didn't talk about bird watching and bird collecting, and there are all kinds of bird topics that we just did not get into. So here we are, and Brian's here. Hi, Brian.
Hello.
And I know Brian is a birding person, so I wanted to start by asking Brian what kind of birding you do.
I'm not really aware that there are many different kinds of birding. You just you go out and you look at birds and then you come home again. That's pretty much it.
But it's a massive collecting, isn't it?
There are actually different sorts, yes, depending exactly how much you're into listing and keeping notes and records. Some people just like to go out and watch birds, and some people like to effectively collect as many sightings of as many different birds under various criteria. Like I bird mostly in my local county, Grant County in New Mexico, it's fairly large and it's very sparsely populated. It has a fairly good variety of birds. Different places where people will bird just their local patch or the whole state. Because, Grant County is probably about the size of some small eastern states like Rhode Island and Delaware and things. People may bird in different countries. People do try and collect as many lifetime species, or lifers as they call them, as possible. There are currently around 10,400 species of bird on the planet. That number changes all the time because cladistic taxonomists are really, really keen on recategorizing everything all the time. So every year, the number of species changes.
I just saw an article that said they had done some genetic testing on falcons and discovered they were related to parrots.
Yes, falcons are no longer classified, certainly in the AOU list, the American Ornithological Union. They are no longer classified along with the hawks and other birds of prey. They're completely separate, and yes, they're down somewhere near parrots and woodpeckers. So it's highly entertaining keeping a list, because you can do things like get new species just because somebody has split an existing species into two, and you've got both of the existing bits. You've seen both populations that are now separate species. That's happened to me at least possibly 3 times just since I've been here since I've been birding in America.
So you're observing birds, and then it turns out that they're not one species, they're two.
Yes, the split in 2016. The California scrub jay, which you may be familiar with, Juliet, because they're raucous little birds, or reasonable sized birds, is now a separate species from Woodhouse's scrub jay, which I get in my yard here. They used to be both one species. They were called western scrub jay. But it was decided that there were enough morphological and genetic differences between the populations to warrant considering them separate species. This happens a lot.
Okay, so interbreeding is not... what am I trying to say? When people just define species...
species is a hugely artificial human categorization, and it doesn't work. No animal knows what species it's in. A number of species can interbreed, and in some cases can produce... the official definition is that they cannot produce viable offspring, but in practice, that's not actually true. Also, there is a particular instance of a species of gull that is used as an indication of how awkward the species definition is. There is a gull, and I can't specifically remember which one. It's an Arctic species. It occurs all around the Arctic Circle.
Okay.
Now, if you start at one particular point and go west, it can breed with the birds to the west of it. Those birds can breed with the birds further west. And you keep going round in a circle, but by the time you come back to the beginning, you've reached birds that cannot breed with your original population. So there's a sharp line at one end, but there is no stop at the other. There's no point at which you can say that's where the species divides.
Oh, that's interesting.
That also occurs in California with a group of different salamander species. It's fairly unusual. It's called a ring species, originally because of this gull ringing around the Arctic Circle.
I'm aware of the salamanders.
And it shows that... Sorry, yes?
Oh, I just said I'm aware of the salamanders, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I wasn't until fairly recently. I learned that, but I knew about the gull because, yes, it's a classic thing that shows that species doesn't actually work. It's an artificial designation.
Right. I mean, well, categorization is one of those things that we feel so confident about a lot of the time.
We love putting things in boxes, and sometimes we go like, it has to go in this box or this box. And it's like, no, there kind of needs to be a tunnel between these two boxes that things can wander back and forth along. We're just, as creatures, we really have this habit of trying to categorize everything, and the categories that we choose are not always appropriate.
Well, and also, you know, when you look at the way that words get meanings across languages, you know, the categories that they fall in are not necessarily the same. So that's like one of the major things that differs across languages is the way that people categorize the stuff that they define as things, you know? So yes, absolutely. That is a good point. But I think it also, this is also relevant to this, is the fact that Darwin sort of got started doing his thing, looking at bird species and speciation in the Galapagos Islands.
That was one of the main things that made him realize what was going on. He did studies of a lot of different things, but the speciation of finches in the Galapagos Island, where different otherwise similar looking birds had different bills depending on what their diet was, and in some cases had you know, evolved quite different feeding habits depending on what food was available. They had colonized various niches on various islands, and if there's no competition and there's a food source, creatures will adapt to consume that food source.
Right. So we've learned a lot from birds, I think. Though I think when did really, maybe this may be something that we can't put a specific year on, but maybe you would be able to, Brian, or somebody here. When did we start thinking of birds as dinosaurs? Like, I remember when I was a kid, it was like, ooh, there were dinosaur birds, and it was Archaeopteryx, and that was like it. And now, in the last, well, certainly in my kids' lifetime, it seems like we've come over to a view where we have no idea how many dinosaur species actually had proto-feathers, and it could have been the majority of them on land.
The current view is that it's probably the majority. What we have basically done is, and again, it comes down to the cladists and their genetic studies and various complex things to do with genetic nearness. What we have is a situation where we used to think we had, you know, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals.
Right.
Reptile doesn't work anymore because birds actually come out of the middle of reptiles if you actually try and structure them. I think it's the tortoises and crocodiles are older and the lizards and snakes are newer, but birds come up out of the middle of that. So if you classify both the snake lizard group and the turtles and crocodilians group as all being reptiles, then you can't logically exclude birds because they're literally in the middle. You don't have a common ancestor that you can go to for all the reptiles without including the birds.
Right.
So a lot of people are effectively saying, well, birds are reptiles. So some of our old classifications simply don't work anymore. And again, it's partly down to the fact that we like to classify things without necessarily knowing all the facts about those things.
Right.
You know, a lot of, in the early days of dinosaurs, there were all sorts of interesting things. Back at a park at Crystal Palace in London, they had some dinosaur statues that they put together.
Yep.
Have you seen the iguanodons with the little spike on the? Yes, you've seen the ones I'm talking about. They had iguanodons as these four-legged lizard-like things with a big spike on the nose. That spike is actually the thumb spike. But they didn't know how to put the skeletons together. They had no idea exactly what these things were. So our understanding of dinosaurs has changed and continues to change and will continue to change all the time as we find new ways of getting information about these things.
Yeah.
You know, we are far better at extracting high quality fossils from strata than we ever used to be. And we're finding fossils in places that we never used to look. I'm not sure if you're aware, but there's a huge amount of dinosaur evidence these days is coming out of China that never used to be the case. You know, all the traditional dinosaur beds, some are in Europe, a lot of them are in the Americas. You know, Drumheller up in Alberta and other quarries, the quarries where the Burgess Shale was, etc. All, you know, we've had these various places where we've extracted huge amounts of bones, you know, largely as a side effect of quarrying is how they originally kind of discovered.
Right.
And now we've got other areas of the world that paleontologists are studying, and with the advanced techniques that, you know, you didn't have in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, when there were literally dinosaur wars. You should look up about this. Look up. There's a couple of particular fossil hunters who would literally employ teams of people to try and sabotage each other and find the best dinosaur skeletons back in the, I think it was the 1880s.
In Utah,
But
thereabouts.
there you go.
Wow.
Yeah, I can't remember the names of the two guys involved, but there's some horrendous stories about the stuff that they tried to do to handicap each other and get the best stuff for all the museums that were then starting to try and, you know, collect these things.
Knowledge and truth, man. It's all about me being better than that guy.
Yep.
Boy, isn't that where we are? So, moving on. Cool. So, yeah, I was very intrigued by what you said about the birds being sort of in between the snake lizard group and the, what was it? Turtle crocodile?
I think so. I would have to look at the diagrams to check whether I'm absolutely right on that. But basically, yes, there's, again, this is done by checking the various genetic components of modern creatures.
Yeah.
Obviously, you cannot check the genetic components of dinosaurs, but what you can find is that you know, all lizards share certain things in common with all birds, but do not share those things in common with tortoises and crocodiles. That indicates that tortoises and crocodiles branched off beforehand.
So it's about
you know, the same thing is done with the human genome tracking and stuff. You find out when a particular gene appeared in a population, and then after that it may have spread, but you can see which, you know, that it didn't spread back into certain areas, so it only arose after a certain point, and there's a whole host of that goes on.
So my understanding is that birds are warm-blooded.
Yes, depends what you mean by warm-blooded, but yes, they are generally regarded as capable of controlling their own body temperature.
Yeah, bloodedness is another one of those things that is a huge skirmish in the cladistic wars.
Tell me about that, Kate.
Well, again, looking at needing bright line walls and bottoms of our drawers here, there are animals that are not just one or the other. You know, you can go lay in the sun and affect your heat that way too. So trying to say that dinosaurs were warm-blooded or cold-blooded is sort of it's sort of a non-argument now. It's how much and to what degree.
It is no longer a meaningful biological distinction in terms of that binary. There are a whole range of techniques, and yes, most creatures will use multiple techniques to maintain or amend body temperature. you know, we think of cows. Cows are mammals. They're warm-blooded. Well, you can wander around in ranch land and you'll see if it's hot, cows are all lying down under trees because it is cooler under the trees. They're not just, you know, maintaining their temperature simply through metabolism. They're still going like, I need the extra effects of environment to assist me.
Right.
Elephants with their, you know, ear flapping, there's this area pumping blood through the ear to cool off.
So, yeah, right. We take a number of techniques to affect our body heat as well. So, okay, well, I mean,
so it's not
interesting because, you know,
feathers were almost certainly an early adaptation for helping to control body temperature.
Yep.
That's likely to be how they arose. They assisted with other forms of behavior, probably in particular jumping out of trees and being able to glide more effectively by spreading kind of wings. If you want to know what some of the early dinosaurs would have looked like and behaved like, honestly, watch films about roadrunners.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
They are incredibly dinosaur-like in many, many of their behaviors. When you see a roadrunner hopping around, and I get them at the house. I've actually had them eat hummingbirds at my house. They will perch on the roof and they will jump off and grab hummingbirds at the feeder. And that is the sort of thing that the dinosaurs and the feathers would have originally helped. They would have been up at elevation and they would have jumped down onto prey. And it makes it a lot easier if you can brake with feathers, or if you can glide a little distance to control your landing better. So that's one of the things where probably the interlocking and the development of flight feathers. Remember, most of the feathers on a bird are not flight feathers. They're nothing to do with flying. They are insulation.
Right. Most feathers. That's a good point.
Only a tiny percentage.
If you want to write about bloodedness, I would definitely suggest doing about an hour's worth of research first, so that when people read it, they're, you know, if you have someone who's a scientist reading it and they're going, "Oh God, no," you know, getting some of the specialized language down is really important, and it's not that hard.
That's interesting.
Cool.
Interesting. So, okay. So, I want to talk about birds of the world. I mean, because it's in part because of the way that we categorize, right? And because of the way that we think about, you know, what's a bird. The prototype bird is a bird that flies. But not all birds fly.
I suddenly find myself compelled to yell, "Porg!"
Well, they do fly, and they were just apparently they were put there because they couldn't deal with the fact that there were puffins in every shot, so they decided to CGI them into something else.
I think that's awesome, actually, because why should you try to get the puffins to go away? Honestly, like let them do their thing. Right?
Now we're going to have a mania for inclusion of birds as world building.
Well, hey, maybe if we get enough birds in, we'll get some people of color someday.
The flight. Can I just briefly talk about the flight thing? Because people connect birds and flight.
Yeah, they do.
Birds are by no means the only things that fly. Most invertebrates, tons of invertebrates fly, and bats are actually an incredibly successful branch of mammals that people overlook hugely. An awful lot more mammals are bats than you realize. There are tons of bat species.
Brian, I was just reading a terrible book, and one of the first things they said in the world building, they said, "Oh, well, this planet only has arthropods, therefore nothing flies." And I just went, "Ah!"
Oh my God. Yeah, no. It's like, the dominant flying creatures for a very, very, very long time were not birds.
Right. They were like dragonflies.
Yes, there were dragonflies that were about 3 feet wide because there was higher oxygen concentration in the atmosphere, and their metabolism could support much larger creatures than it can today.
Yep.
So yes, there's another world building thing. If you have higher oxygen concentrations, it completely changes how metabolisms can work in various of your creatures. So if you want giant flying insect, it's actually really easy. You just have a higher oxygen atmosphere. That has a lot of other effects, like everything's a lot more flammable.
Yeah.
I made both of these points in my novel, which takes place on a planet full of arthropods who are enlarged because it's high oxygen.
Perfect.
And
yours was clearly not the book Kate was talking about.
Yeah, I don't have video, or I could show you the literal stack of my manuscript, which is where it's at right now. But anyway, yeah, that's I had flying not birds, but arthropods of various kinds, and not dragonflies, and not. I mean, they were like sort of vaguely like terrestrial organisms, but more like hallucinogen than something you would.
Ooh, cool.
Yeah, the Burgess shale is such a good source for going off in different evolutionary directions.
Oh yeah, I love the Wonderful Life book by Stephen Jay Gould. Yeah.
What is this book?
Wonderful Life, Stephen Jay Gould.
Yep.
Okay. I know him.
And I would second with Dave Quammen. Go read him. Go read him now.
Jay,
and actually,
JBS chat bar, Kate, or is that not a possibility?
I will put it in the chat bar. And also, if anyone's read Pratchett and the one about Australia where that's all of the beetles, and someone in there says God has an inordinate fondness for beetles, that's actually a quote of the scientist JBS Haldane, which apparently Pratchett was a big fan of.
Yeah, but the real question is, which is God's favorite beetle? Was it John Paul George or Rick?
And has it been discovered yet?
Yeah, he's keeping it secret from us.
Paul is dead.
Yes, Haldane was allegedly asked at a party because he was highly religious as well, and so he was asked, "What has your study of biology taught you about God?" And he thought for a minute, and he said that he has an inordinate fondness for beetles.
That's awesome. Okay, so
it is one of my favorite
so
quotes.
we took a little sidebar there onto things that fly that are not birds.
Can we have a whole episode on that, please?
Because
sorry,
I want a whole episode on things that fly that aren't birds, especially.
Okay, I'm writing it down now.
Yes,
I don't know.
Maybe we could add things that swim that are not fish.
Yes, that too.
There's no such thing as a fish. It's another.
Let's leave that for our.
Tell that to the rabbis.
Flying is energy intensive.
Yes.
And birds. People think, they see birds flying and they want to fly and they think, oh, it must be lovely, birds flying, for the fun of it. Most birds do not fly for the fun of it. Most birds avoid flying at every possible opportunity.
Yeah.
If birds end up on islands without predators, they almost invariably lose the ability to fly because it's incredibly taxing to develop those wings and it's incredibly energy inefficient to fly. They are really actually bad at it.
Which is why Jonathan Livingston Seagull was such an interesting book, because it posited a bird that was flying for art rather than sustenance.
Yes, and I always wondered where the bird's speedometer was, because he kept saying, "Oh, well, now we're going 200 miles an hour," and you're like, "How do you even know that?"
That's a translation from the original Klingon or Seagull or whatever.
Ah, good point.
So, dang it. Okay, so birds that do not fly. Actually, no, I was going to recommend, there's a really wonderful, wonderful video series called The Life of Birds.
Which also has an accompanying book. Hold on a moment.
Well, while he goes looking, I'd like to. There was a book that came out 30 years ago with a sort of sexist title, but it was called After Man, and it posited humanity had come and gone.
Say something, Brian.
But done. Oh, there you go.
The Life of Birds.
Right.
David Attenborough.
Oh, we love David Attenborough.
Yep, he's still going. Britain's greatest national treasure.
But anyway, so if you guys ever have a chance to see the Life of Birds series with David Attenborough, it's wonderful and super, super interesting. And we'll give you tons of ideas about birds.
Cool. Cool.
Yeah,
so let me just finish my point real quick.
Sure, Cliff, go ahead.
And After Man, he posits various, gaps in the ecological niches because of mass extinctions as a result, a side effect of humanity. And he posits, then he makes up which species gets to go fill them. And all the cetaceans died out because we killed them all or changed conditions so they died. So he replaced them with penguins. And he had these massive, he had dolphin-sized penguins and whale-sized penguins and all of these crazy penguins, which were flightless birds, but, underwater filling out these niches. So, potentially someone could do something like that, either on a made-up planet.
Surprising. Penguins are very surprising.
Yeah.
Because they're actually in far more places.
Here is a giant penguin.
Oh, is that?
Oh, there you go. There you go. That's it. Yes.
I have the book. What a surprise!
Shocking! I tell you.
My library is a legend here.
There was also a DVD series based on that.
That I didn't know.
Three episodes. I will go downstairs. I can't show it, but I will go downstairs and find it if I can in my collection.
That's cool. So, okay, so let's talk about. I'm still going back to the idea of the birds that don't fly. So penguins are in a lot more of the world than you might expect. Generally speaking, all the southern hemisphere, but they're really quite all over the place. I didn't quite know how pervasive they were until I got a book for my kids about penguins. But there are a lot of different species of penguin, and some of them are quite close to the equator. They don't tend to be in the northern hemisphere, but they're all over the place in the southern hemisphere. And there are lots of different sizes, and there are lots of different shapes, and yeah. So don't underestimate the penguins. I have seen penguins. I've gone down to watch the fairy penguins in Australia. Oh my gosh, they are so incredibly adorable. It's funny because they still keep doing their thing, even with like large groups, large audiences of people watching them. You're like, why are all these people just watching me go from the sea to my burrow? But anyway, they're incredibly cute. And I believe that they carry their knees internally.
Yes, they do.
Which is
also, did you know penguins live in houses?
Tell me about that.
Off the coast of South Africa, the South African penguins. Off the coast of Namibia, near Luderitz, there are some old guano mining islands, which have huts on it that the guano miners used to live in while they were mining. Once they'd excavated all the guano, they left. The huts remained. The penguins live in those huts. They come ashore, they climb up the steps, they get into the houses, they go inside for shade. And then when a boat sails past, I kid you not, they will come out of the houses and stand on the veranda to watch you. It's the most amazing thing.
Aww.
Like I just wrote in the chat, penguins do fly. The medium that they fly through is simply not
It's
air.
water.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Good
I've
point.
had them. You know how
saying that
at the bow wave of a boat you get porpoises and so forth.
Yeah.
That will use the bow wave of the boat. Penguins do exactly the same thing.
Really?
Oh, cool.
Yes.
That's got to be
I've been in that boat. When we went out to see those penguins, we had penguins playing in the bow wave of the boat.
That's awesome.
It was pretty damn cool.
So I put in the side notes the Afterman video version is called "The Future Is Wild,"
Okay.
And it was 3 parts at 5 million, 100 million, and 200 million years in the future. And it's Dougal Dixon is the author and illustrator of the original text, who is one of the people who worked on the video and did the concept behind the critters. So it's really fascinating.
I've heard of this book, but I have not seen the video series.
There's also a sequel called Man After Man, in which he posits post-humans splitting up, speciating in different, mostly non-sentient creatures.
Huh.
So,
all right. Well, let's go back to the birds for a minute.
Morlocks. Okay.
I think yeah, that's true.
Morlocks, yes. Weird parasitical people. It's just strange.
Do we have more on penguins?
Penguins is practically chickens.
Penguins, again, they're the commonest example that we tend to think of with non-flying birds, but there are a lot of others. I know Che already put in the sidebar things like ostriches and their evolutionary.
Make sure we got to ostriches and
emus. We touched on them last time, and my favorite, terror birds.
And cassowaries.
And yeah, cassowary. That was Rhea. Rhea are also cassowary and Rhea.
Emus, remember, are the only creatures to have won a land war in Australia.
Yes, they did.
They are.
Decisively.
There's a fantastic comic about that I posted on my Facebook that I found.
Yeah, I saw that.
And actually, one of the bigger questions in distinguishing what birds do what is whether or not they have penises, because many of them don't.
Ah, right.
Right.
That's
and the
true.
word you're looking for is cloaca.
Indeed.
They're internal. Their sex organs are all internal.
There's a huge variety in reptiles, so again, it's probable that the various bird things arise from some of the different. There are all sorts of strange hemipenis things going on in the reptile world.
Well, in fact, I think that phalluses are one of the most incredibly variable things in the natural world.
As any dolphin will tell you.
Yeah. So there's that. That would take a whole other hour.
I think we're doing a penis episode, right?
Well,
they brought it up, not me.
We can,
so to speak.
I'm not sure I'm ready to go there. Not today. Anyway.
I can't make it that week.
Busy.
Man.
Well, there's infamously duck penises, but anyway, we can go on from there.
You could call it where no schlong has gone before.
Oh! I have a completely not flight or reproduction based question about avians.
Okay.
So flight is very energy intensive. Brains are very energy intensive. So how do we manage to create a believable sentient alien species that will not make the biologist shriek? What are they eating? Can we actually make them that smart?
Well, parrots
are smart. But
yeah, I mean, Alex was really smart.
Yeah.
You can, but they have to have a really abundant food source that they can't eat their way out of.
Okay.
What does that mean?
They can't end up
starving,
needing so much of the food material that they denude their environment of that food stuff.
Which, I mean, there is a case to be made that intelligence will probably predominantly arise in omnivores for that reason.
Right.
I think that's a good argument.
Right.
I'm sure it can be disproved if we get out there and explore the universe enough, but as a broad...
Well, and also birds are
assumption.
omnivores. Some of them are.
Some birds, more birds than you think are omnivores. Hummingbirds, everyone thinks hummingbirds just drink nectar. 25% of a hummingbird's diet is insects.
Yeah.
More things that we think of are omnivorous than we've previously given credit to. We've seen carnivorous deer now.
Yeah.
It can also help if you create a planet with a lower gravity and maybe, an atmosphere that's easy for flight. So, you know, there's that.
So we have more oxygen, but less gravity?
Yeah, I don't know if that can work with the laws of physics, but
yeah, I don't know.
If you put the right, I don't know, if you put the right magnetic field on it, maybe you can retain that kind of an atmosphere in a low world.
We're not doing physics today. We're doing biology, so we don't worry about
that. You know, when I was a little kid, I went to what was then the New Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., and they had an exhibit that I remember decades later where you were given buttons, and the buttons were like, do high gravity, low gravity, middle gravity, air, land, water, close to the sun, not so close to the sun, far from the sun. You push one sequence and you get a picture of the critter there, of a sentient critter.
Right.
And it was, I guess there were 27 combinations, and I sat there and I did all of them, because all these paintings were fascinating to me, and this thinking about how you change the planet changes the life forms. So yeah, we do have to do, sadly, physics and chemistry to get biology, right? So
okay, so let's get storytelling here for a second, and I will say yes. Right now we're talking about making, creating species that won't make the biologists scream. But at the same time, a lot of times we're making the physicists scream, or we're making somebody scream, but that's not necessarily a reason not to write the story either.
Sure.
Right?
You should, as I often say,
okay, this is my thing I'm just going to mess with. I'm going to set it aside here, and here we're going to tell a story. Sure. So.
Years ago, the people who do contact culture, the imaginations, did the world of Epona, which was, there were some short stories and a, quote, science article about this made-up world in Analog magazine. And it started with the planet and the planet's orbit and the geology, and then moved on to, they built it, multi-person team of, physicists and anthropologists and biologists and all that, built it from the ground up and put a biosphere on it, and then landed some humans there. Mm-hmm. First as a role-playing kind of thing with an audience, and then later in fiction. And it took several years because of the conference was annual. Now it's every 2 years. And it's happening this year. Everyone should go. But it's very interesting. You can Google it. There's still, I think, a website for it. It's called Epona, E-P-O-N-A. And there were flying sentient life forms that didn't have lungs, that had to keep flying to breathe. Because the air had to pass through them, like gills, like water through gills.
Sure.
So that was kind of interesting.
So we have air sharks.
Yes.
Except they were people.
They were people?
Yeah, they were dominant sentient life form.
Okay.
Candygram.
Flowers.
Hi, Tanya. Welcome.
Sorry, Juliet.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry I'm late, but I didn't know how to connect.
I apologize. I should have done a better job of connecting you. Yeah, but you know what? Look at this party we're having.
I couldn't get in either.
It's pretty amazing. I actually wanted to remember how we were talking. We mentioned ostriches and emus and stuff earlier. One of the places that I've seen birds used interestingly in fiction is in you guys remember in Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind? They have bird mounts.
Yeah, the horse claws.
That are like big giant ostrichy things.
Yeah, they were called horse claws, and they were actually apparently supposedly genetically engineered horses. So they actually started as horses.
Wow. Where did you get this info, Che?
I've read the manga like 3 times.
Oh, okay.
Over the years. So it's all in there. I've read that book a lot. It's one of my go-tos.
Sure. I'm just curious because I'm like, Che is obviously speaking like the authority on this. I just want to know. You're the anime of person of us, I think.
It's not in the anime. The manga is so much richer and deeper and fuller and better.
Cool. But anyway, so they are very bird-like, and I thought that was interesting.
Yep.
Though clearly they are evolved. I don't know.
Okay, this is dumb, but there's also Final Fantasy VII chocobos.
I did want to say something about bird intelligence because we have very particular ideas about what sentience means. And the longer we go on, I think the more we realize that just because we express our sentience in a particular way, it doesn't mean that we're the only ones who have sentience. So, people talk about how deeply intelligent cetaceans are and elephants, for example. So I think that's interesting because of what Brian was saying about parrots and corvids being really, really intelligent. So
they're intelligent. They're omnivores again, which helps. Yeah. They're long-lived. They have communication skills, so they can pass information on to one another, both to other individuals in a flock and to their young, so they can teach. And in the case of they're both tool-using, but corvids, certain species of corvids, will actually make tools. Rather than use something that they find, they will go, this thing that I have found is not quite the right tool, I will amend it to the purpose that I need. So tool making is normally regarded as, tool using was regarded as a sign of intelligence. Tool making is certainly a sign of a level of intelligence that bears consideration.
Yep.
It makes you wonder, if something with such a small brain can do that, why do we have these big noggins?
Our big dumb brains.
Oh, there is more than one way to...
It doesn't take much to figure that kind of stuff out. What are we doing with these big brains?
Mostly worrying a lot.
There's more than one way to solve an evolutionary problem, I guess would be my immediate thought. Right?
It's the stuff that I was recently studying about human evolution was indicating that the brain size starts to expand rapidly at the same time as the changes in the jaw permit complex linguistic expression. If you look at previous tool using hominid species, they did not have particularly large brains, but they were still using and making tools and doing the sorts of activities. Our large brains appear to be somewhat related to linguistic capability. I'm not, parrots and so forth can talk and can use a lot of different structures, but they don't necessarily have the level of complexity of language that human beings do. And that may be, it's hard to prove, but that may be a deciding factor of why we have huge brains and why cetaceans have huge brains.
That's true too. Well, and cetaceans, I think cetaceans are a really interesting example because I have often tried to wrap my brain around the idea of how one would use sound to communicate when sound was also how you perceive reality. So there's definitely a story there. But it was about words.
So, just to touch on that, sight is the primary way that we perceive the world, but we also communicate through a lot of visual means. So isn't it somewhat the same thing?
Hard to say, right? Yes.
We can tell the difference between the visual things that we've created versus the things that are just out there. So
one of the things that's proving the hardest thing to do in artificial intelligence is the kind of level of visual pattern recognition that we humans have. That's why a lot of the captures now, the anti-robot things, are mark all of these pictures that contain a bridge.
Yeah.
Because bots cannot do that.
Now I'm back to IQ tests and wondering exactly how well other humans are able to do that as well. But
let's not get into the racial component of IQ tests. Or cultural.
That's a whole other
and
episode.
racial. It is a whole episode and more.
Yeah.
It's a whole graduate seminar.
Well, I mean, testing itself is, you could spend hours on, you know, the whole idea that tests actually measure things and that those things that they measure are supposed to mean something specific. Yeah.
Speaking of, what do you do with the distinction between perception and creation?
Yeah.
Is there a reason why birds have to be oviparous?
It's efficient for them not to have to carry internal young around. If you're flying, you want to keep your weight as low as possible. The last thing you want is 4 baby birds stuck inside. There are actually birds that carry their young after they're born. Occasionally, there's one particular species of. I mean, a lot of birds will do it on the water. You know, the birds will tuck in. There's actually one species of grebe somewhere, I think in Central America, that has kind of these little pouches that they can tuck a couple of chicks in, and they can literally fly carrying their chicks.
Woo!
Wow.
Well, I think the reason, birds lay eggs is they evolved from dinosaurs, right? And
but reptiles have a high variety of egg-laying or viviparous options.
Yeah.
That both predate and post-date.
Sure, but once they started off laying eggs, it kind of worked for them for all the reasons you said. So there was no evolutionary pressure to cause them to bear live young.
Well, some do. So there must have been some.
Well, I guess if you have to protect the nest, that's an evolutionary pressure. It depends on where you nest and what the predation.
Wait, dinosaurs or birds had live young? What are we talking about?
I don't think there are any birds with live young. There are reptiles with live young.
Yeah, there are a lot of reptiles, but no birds.
Yeah, I was referring to reptiles. Sorry if that was clear.
I'm very confused now.
Which reptiles have live young?
A number of different snake species, some lizard species.
First I heard.
Look up oviparous versus viviparous, particularly in snakes. You'll see a lot of examples of both.
Cool.
So you'll have things like swans carrying their babies on their backs on the wall.
Most aquatic birds do that for their initially, because it's a way of keeping the young with them while the young still have the downy feathers, which are not waterproof.
I just feel like pregnant ostriches makes more sense for them to be able to run around. But
ostriches have extremely large broods. The young are incredibly sensitive. They basically operate on I'm going to have loads of kids, and some of them might make it approach.
Right.
The same way as there are a lot of species. It depends again. There's different evolutionary pressures, but a lot of species take I will only have a few babies and I will look after them really well. And a lot of species take I will just have tons of babies and let them fend for themselves. And ostriches are more at that end. Ostriches will have broods of up to 20 chicks.
Wow.
The survival rate is low. A safari guide once when I was in Africa was joking. He was like, "Don't look at the baby ostriches, you might kill them." He's like, "They're that sensitive."
Oh gosh, darn.
So among birds you have everything from penguins with a single offspring per season to ostriches on the far end, or is there something that's even more broody than an ostrich?
Ostriches, quail, other ground birds. Often, if they're ground nesters and ground feeders that do not fly very much, but do have predators, then they will tend to have lots and lots of chicks for a chance of some surviving. So yeah, some of these birds will then operate creches, and they will operate so that they have lookouts. And I see male quail all the time, and they'll sit up on a post and they will call to let the quail in the valley generally know whether it's safe, and they'll change their call if there's anything that people should be worried about. And then the other parents who are with the chicks will hustle them all together, and the whole lot will kind of run and go and shelter somewhere.
And as we get to the end of our hour, I'm going to mention the kiwi, which its egg is like most of its body weight when it has an egg.
Pretty bum.
Yeah. And those are kind of amazing too. And you only do that. You don't have a lot of those.
by an old measure, they changed the way of doing this, but by an old birding joke is what bird has the shortest bill in the world? And the answer is the kiwi. Because what they used to do when measuring bill length, because it's very difficult to determine where the back end of a bill is. It's really easy to tell where the front is, but where does the bill stop and become just skull or head or whatever?
Right.
So they used to measure from the tip of the bill to the nostrils, and that would be the official way they would determine.
What would they measure?
From the tip of the bill to the nostrils.
From the tip of the bill to the nostrils. Kiwis, the nostrils are right at the tip of the bill.
Right.
Yeah.
Unlike any other bird, because they're snuffling around literally undergrowth and stuff for their prey. So they have nostrils in the tip of their bill, which other birds do not have. They have a much more advanced sense of smell than most birds. A lot of birds can't really smell. Some species of vulture can smell and some can't. The ones that can smell will find carrion. The ones that can't smell will follow those and also feed on the carrion.
You know, in fact, the National Geographic did a fascinating article on vultures that I highly recommend. Talking about how vultures are endangered and how important they are to the ecosystems that they live in.
Also, Old World and New World vultures are not closely related. It's convergent evolution. They both occupy a similar niche. Old World vultures are mostly in the birds of prey. New World vultures mostly seem to have arisen from something related to a stork or an ibis.
Yeah. And also, so just for fictional purposes, I think it's really useful just to sort of look around the world and see what kind of birds you encounter when you are in a given place. Because we grow up in particular places and then we end up developing expectations about what kinds of birds we're going to see around. And if you go to someplace else, you may be very surprised. I remember the first time I went to Australia and I started seeing ibises everywhere and parrots everywhere. And I'm thinking, what, like my whole world concept about what birds you should expect to find around was completely blown away when I went there. So I think just even thinking about what kind of birds you might run into is a great way of making your world seem different.
A lot of Americans, I find, don't realize that hummingbirds don't exist in the rest of the world, only in the Americas.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I miss them a lot.
Study hummingbirds because they're awesome.
They are awesome. They're also incredibly successful. There are way more species of hummingbird than you could imagine. I had a friend recently who went out to Ecuador and they saw 57 species of hummingbird in a day.
Wow.
I only get
I
have less than 10 different species at my feeders.
You know what? I knew that if we started talking about birds again, we would be able to fill an hour.
Did we even get to raptors yet?
No.
We've touched on them a few times. We haven't spent a bunch of time on them. But but what I wanted to say was, okay, so this is our new time. I'm content with it. And I think this works pretty well. So next week is going to be 9 plus 7. So
it's the 16th. It's Tuesday the 16th.
Okay, so is it the 16th? Okay, great. So So let's see. Why don't we next week do things that fly that aren't birds? Just for fun.
Okay.
So that's planes and Superman, as far as I can tell from the whole
Bats.
Or frogs, if you like underdogs.
Yeah. And we can explore that, and it'll be fun. And then the week after that is when Ann Leckie will be on the show.
Yay!
And we are going to have super fun that day because we can geek out about the Imperial Rock series and talk about pronouns and exciting things like that.
Yay!
So, that's what it looks like
make
going
a final
forward.
Statement?
What did you say?
Can I make a final comment on this subject that I've been waiting till the end of part 2 to do?
Yep.
Because I want it to be final. Free bird!
Okay. Now you have to play a 9-minute guitar solo.
Yes, exactly.
Well,
if I stay here,
all right, well,
with you,
thank you all for being here. I'm going to
mute him now.
If anybody